You want to talk to me?
Yes. Open the floor for discussion. Questions? Comments?
Gordon, I'll try. Just trying to confirm a few things that I think I heard. Association is inherent within the individual, the need to. In let's say, in a Aristotelian sense, it's part of our essence.
That's a bit strongly put.
Okay. When you said, I think you said it was both inherent and guided, right?
Yeah, okay.
And when I was talking about the inherent nature.
Yeah. Okay. Let me try to understand myself here. I mean, what I was saying is basically that a certain drive to association is latently present, and that's what both of them say.
Right.
Bourgeois society produces a certain drive to, a certain need to freely associate, that's what Marx and Engels would say, and well, in Freud it's slightly different. You wouldn't exactly say that there's a need, but the connectivity of ideas, the structured aspect of the connectivity of ideas is latently present, although it's constantly denied and repressed by the order of articulated speech, let's say.
And that led me to my next question. So that need is mediated through language. Always, or it needs to be?
Yeah, well, in Freud you could say that, I think. In Marx it doesn't really make sense to argue.
All right, well, maybe then, because I was leading up to my question, which is association necessarily an intellectual process? That was the question. And I was thinking in terms of, obviously for Freud, the patient has to be able to express the problem. And I was also thinking for Marx, his idea that the proletarian revolution could only happen in an educated society because the uneducated society would be too conservative.
Yeah, I think I have quite a lot of intuitions on that. The first would be that association is a word, or is a term that quite strongly describes the anti-philosophical claims of both Freud and Marx, because association is a means, a therapeutic means maybe, that undermines the regular forms of articulation, the regular forms of representation. And both of them, of course, for precisely that reason, is quite strongly critical about what philosophy normally is. And so that's my first intuition. The second intuition is that, much more strongly in Freud than in Marx, the therapy has a cathartic structure. So it is about cognizing the structure of the complex by being confronted with it as it appears in the connectivity of these associations. In Marx, I would say it's much less an intellectual process, because it's much more strongly an organizational form that actually takes place on the level of proletarian politics, self-organization, taking control of means of production, of working class struggle. And that's not only, it might be mediated through, it might be guided by, and so forth. That's not only an intellectual thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is, in terms of the organization, do you draw the distinction between association and community in the sense in which sociology makes that distinction?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure. I mean, association, I'm actually looking for a form of community that would be resistant against forms of identitarian conception of politics. Yeah? So this is somehow connected to that impulse, that interest that I have. So in this sense, I would say association might be an open form of connectivity. Yeah? You know, that's a beautiful thing, and actually what I call the aesthetic part, the structure of association, that it's about an open referentiality. It's not an identitarian constitution of one specific ethnic or cultural or whatever group. The only thing that people who associate in associations of these politically, economically inspired forms, the only thing that these people share is actually that they are busy with material practices. Yeah? That they are part of the material, the socio-economic structure. And it is not that they are, I don't know, Germans, Dutch people, single mothers, and so forth. So in this sense, I would try to make sense of the concept of association against the claims to communitarian identities.
Yeah, that really makes sense. But my second question is like, would community attachments and community ties get in the way of possibly having this kind of association, in that people are too tied to their sense of identity, in the sense you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean, very obviously so. I guess this is what has happened too often. But I wasn't exactly speaking about this. And I only think that it's interesting to see that the form of community, which is introduced in the socialist tradition, how deeply should I go into that? Because, well, I agree, yes. I mean, that wasn't, sorry, I mean, I really agree. I think that this is, that there's a tension, and this might be a problem for socialist politics in terms of association, free association. I just don't think that I can say anything more about this qualifiedly than I already have.
Just a couple comments. It seems that if you're looking for a resistant connectivity, so as far as community goes, perhaps this isn't quite the right platform to take, because it seems that both the Freudian psychoanalysis and Marxism are very, very context-driven. They're very specific to the time and the forces that we're putting in. So to take them out of that context and try to find a more resistant subtext to that, it seems a little bit counterintuitive almost. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I understand the problem, and I think that this is really this problem is actually my starting point, because I am more strongly interested in some structural components of both of these theories than in just continuing either of these projects. That means I have to abstract a little bit from their traditions. So maybe this is also partially an answer to what you have asked. My point was not so much that I would very strongly like to argue for exactly this kind of working class politics or anything. I just find it interesting what kind of method, as I call it, both of them employ to critically oppose certain forms of representation. So in this sense, I would say I'm actually really more strongly interested in political ontology than in continuing the project of Marxism.
So, could you say that more than about the connection of Foucault's micropolitics, because that might make that connection, to debate around the structural similarities to contemporary practice.
I can say something about it, but there's something very strongly insinuating in your question that might make me want to ask you to answer this question yourself.
I just wanted a good shot for the camera.
Okay, but if I would have to answer it, I would say, what do I mean by micropolitics? Also, I actually wanted to say, I mean, I took Foucault as an example for someone who argues in terms of isomorphism and equiprimordiality, and equiprimordiality of what? Of the constitution of the subject and the constitution of the body politic. How so? I took Spinoza and Plato as other examples for that, because the constitution of certain forces, bodily drives, has a general structure, and this structure goes all through, as a crystallized structure, as a hegemonic structure, goes all through society. And I find this approach interesting.